Sometimes disrespect doesn't cost you your dignity. It costs you everything. When Karen stormed into Judge Judy's courtroom, she thought her attitude could win the case. She rolled her eyes, insulted the other side, and even dared to tell Judge Judy to calm her hormones. But what happened just 30 seconds later left the entire courtroom frozen in disbelief, because Judge Judy didn't just put Karen in her place. She took away something that would haunt her forever. Karen strutted into Judge Judy's courtroom as if she were stepping onto a runway. Her bright pink blouse shimmered under the lights, paired with oversized sunglasses she didn't bother to remove until the bailiff politely asked her to. She sighed loudly, exaggeratedly, making sure everyone heard just how bothered she was to be there. She chewed her gum with sharp pops, flipping her hair every few seconds, and kept looking around like the room wasn't good enough for her. In one hand, she clutched her purse, a glittery designer knockoff, like it was a badge of power. The moment she sat down, she crossed her legs, leaned back, and gave a little smirk to the cameras. The kind of smirk that said, "I've already won." The case was about something simple, or at least it should have been. Karen had borrowed her neighbor Lila's car for just a few hours to run errands. But when she returned it, the windshield had a long, ugly crack. The passenger door had a deep dent, and there were scratches all along the side. Lila had asked politely what happened, but Karen laughed it off, saying the car wasn't that great to begin with. When Lila pressed for payment, Karen blocked her number and posted on social media, bragging that her neighbor was trying to scam her. Lila finally took the matter to court, and that's how they ended up in front of Judge Judy. From the moment the hearing began, Karen's attitude filled the room. As the bailiff read the case, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Oh my God, this is so unnecessary." The audience was already watching closely. Everyone could sense this wasn't going to end well. Judge Judy, as calm and composed as ever, adjusted her papers and began. "Miss Karen," she said, her tone even but firm, "you borrowed your neighbor's car on June 5th, correct?" Karen shrugged, blowing a bubble with her gum. "I guess. Yeah, I borrowed it. But I brought it back, didn't I?" Judge Judy's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You brought it back damaged," Karen smirked. "Define damaged." The audience let out a collective breath, half laughter, half disbelief. Judy glanced briefly at the audience, then back at Karen. "Cracked windshield, dented door, scratches. That's my definition. Do you disagree?" Karen tilted her head, pretending to think. Cars get scratched all the time. It's called life." Judge Judy paused, letting silence fill the air. "It's also called responsibility," she said coldly. "And if you borrow something, you return it the way you received it." Karen rolled her eyes so hard it was almost comical. "I don't have time for this drama," she said, her voice loud enough to echo across the courtroom. That sentence changed everything. The audience murmured quietly, and Judge Judy placed her pen down, staring directly at Karen. "You're in my courtroom, Ms. Karen," she said slowly. "You'll make time." Karen chuckled and muttered under her breath, "Somebody needs to calm her hormones." The sound of gasps filled the room instantly. Even the bailiff's expression hardened. Lila, sitting quietly to the side, looked shocked. For a brief moment, the room felt frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. The air itself felt heavy. Judge Judy didn't react immediately. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than any shout. Her eyes, cold and steady, locked onto Karen, the kind of look that makes even the most confident person feel small. She didn't say a word for several seconds, and those seconds felt like forever. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, realizing that her little joke might have just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Trying to act unfazed, she leaned back and whispered, "Oh, come on. It's just a joke." But no one laughed. Not the audience. Not Lila, not even Judy. Judge Judy finally spoke, her tone quiet but razor-edged. "Miss Karen, I've been on this bench for more than 2 decades. I've seen arrogance, I've seen denial, and I've seen plenty of excuses. But you might just set a new record today." Karen shrugged, trying to smile, but her confidence wavered. "I just think everyone's overreacting." "Overreacting," Judy repeated softly. You came into my courtroom disrespecting your neighbor, the rules, and now me. That's not confidence, Miss Karen. That's ignorance wrapped in entitlement. Karen looked around, her eyes darting between the cameras and the audience, hoping someone might back her up, but no one did. The atmosphere had changed. The laughter and arrogance she carried in with her had vanished. Now there was only quiet tension and Judge Judy's unbroken stare. In that moment, everyone knew Karen's downfall had already begun. Not with a verdict, not with evidence, but with 6 careless words. Calm your hormones, Judge Judy. Judy finally leaned back, calm as ever, and said, "We'll continue." Her voice was steady, but everyone could feel the storm building beneath it. Karen thought she had power when she walked in, but she was about to learn that in Judge Judy's courtroom, respect isn't requested. It's required. Judge Judy didn't immediately react to Karen's insult. Years on the bench had taught her that sometimes silence was more powerful than anger. She simply looked down at her notes, took a slow breath, and continued in her calm, professional tone. "Let's move on," she said. "We're going to look at the evidence." The courtroom was still tense. The audience hadn't forgotten what Karen said. Even the cameras seemed to linger a little longer on Judge Judy's expression, searching for a sign of what might come next. But Judy stayed composed. That in itself was a warning. "Ms. Lila," Judy said, turning to the plaintiff, "you claim your car was returned with visible damage, a cracked windshield, a dent on the passenger door, and several scratches along the side, correct?" Lila nodded gently. She was a quiet woman, the complete opposite of Karen. Her voice was soft but steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I have pictures and receipts from the repair shop." "Everything's here." She handed a folder to the bailiff, who brought it to Judge Judy. Judy flipped through the documents carefully. Photos, estimates, repair invoices. She examined each one like a detective looking for truth in small details. Karen leaned back in her chair and let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, please," she said loudly. "She's exaggerating everything. That car was already in bad shape. I'm not paying for stuff that was already broken." Judge Judy didn't look up. "You'll have your turn," she said sharply, her eyes still on the photos. "For now, sit quietly." The audience chuckled softly, and Karen frowned, crossing her arms. "I'm just saying she's acting like her car was brand new," Karen muttered under her breath. That was the wrong thing to say. Judge Judy finally looked up, her eyes locking on Karen. "It was brand new," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "Purchased 2 weeks before you borrowed it. Do you still want to argue that it was in bad shape?" For a brief moment, Karen froze. Her confident smirk slipped away. She blinked, caught off guard before quickly recovering with a fake laugh. "Well, then she should have insured it properly. That's her problem, not mine." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You borrowed it," she said slowly. "You damaged it. That makes it your problem." Karen rolled her eyes and gave a mocking smile. "You're being emotional, Judge. Maybe calm your hormones before making decisions," the room gasped. Several people in the audience covered their mouths in disbelief. Even the bailiff's eyes widened slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. You could feel the temperature in the room drop. Judge Judy didn't blink. She didn't even move for a few seconds. Then she leaned forward just a little and spoke in a tone so controlled it sent chills through the courtroom. "Miss Karen," she said, "you just made a very expensive mistake." Karen laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Oh, come on, I was just joking." Judy's eyes narrowed. "Do I look like I'm laughing?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen glanced toward Lila, hoping for some kind of sympathy, but Lila just looked down at her hands. Everyone in the courtroom could feel that the balance had shifted, and not in Karen's favor. Judy returned her attention to the folder. "Ms. Lila," she said, "did you take these pictures immediately after the car was returned?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lila replied. "I took them the same day. You can see the date and timestamp on each one." "Excellent," Judy said, nodding slightly. "And the repair estimate? That's from a certified auto body shop?" "Yes, I went to 2 different ones. Both gave similar numbers," Karen snorted. "Yeah, right. Probably her cousin's garage." Judge Judy's head snapped up again. "Miss Karen," she said sharply, When I tell you to stop talking, that means stop talking. I don't care if you think this is funny, and I promise you the end of this case won't be." Karen shrank slightly in her seat. For the first time, her voice faltered. "I just think she's exaggerating, that's all." Judy ignored her and looked at the papers again. "You drove this car approximately how far?" Karen shrugged. "I don't know, a few miles. Maybe 10. Judy pointed at the odometer readings in the paperwork. "According to these records, you drove it 87 miles. That's not a short errand, Miss Karen. Where exactly were you going?" Karen hesitated. "Just around. You know, shopping, maybe visiting someone." "So you borrowed your neighbor's new car," Judy said, "drove it nearly 90 miles, returned it damaged, and now you think you don't owe her a cent?" Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The audience watched her squirm. Judge Judy sat back, folding her hands calmly. "Miss Karen," she said slowly, "this isn't about a car anymore. It's about integrity. You broke something that wasn't yours, and instead of owning it, you've chosen to insult, lie, and mock your way through this process." Karen forced a weak smile. "You're really making this personal, aren't you?" Judy leaned forward, her tone low and final. "Personal? No. Legal? Absolutely." She paused for a second, her eyes never leaving Karen's. "And before this day is over, you'll understand exactly what that means." The audience remained silent, hanging on every word. Everyone could sense that Judge Judy was done tolerating Karen's arrogance. The evidence was clear. The attitude was recorded. And now only one thing was left: the verdict that would make Karen regret every smug word she had said. Judge Judy leaned forward slowly, her expression unreadable. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, the kind of tone that made even the boldest people nervous. "You want to talk about emotions, Miss Karen?" she began, her words deliberate. "Let's talk about responsibility." The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustling of papers. Judy turned her focus toward Lila, who sat quietly with her hands folded. "Ms. Lila," she said gently, "your repair estimate totals $5,400, correct?" Lila nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. That's from 2 certified shops. I didn't add anything extra. It's just the cost to fix what was damaged." Judy nodded slightly, her eyes still on the paperwork. Then, without looking up, she spoke again. "Miss Karen," she said, her tone tightening just a little, "you not only owe for the damage, but your behavior today shows a complete lack of respect for this court, for your neighbor, and frankly, for yourself." Karen forced a laugh, though her voice trembled. "Oh, come on, Judge, don't take it so personal. I'm just being honest. That woman's making a big deal out of nothing." Judy finally looked up and the room went quiet again. "It's not personal," she said firmly. "It's legal." The words echoed through the courtroom like a gavel strike. She continued flipping through the folder, reviewing each piece of evidence carefully. Karen shifted in her seat, fidgeting with her bracelet, trying to look relaxed but failing miserably. Then Judy's eyes caught something new, a page that hadn't been discussed yet. She pulled it out slowly, adjusting her glasses. It was a printed screenshot of a text message exchange between Karen and Lila. Judge Judy's tone turned even colder. "Miss Lila, when did you receive this message?" Lila answered quietly. "The day after she returned my car. When I asked her to pay for the repairs?" Judy nodded and began reading aloud, every word cutting through the room like a knife. "Don't bother asking me for money. You can't prove anything." A ripple of gasps filled the audience. Karen's smile faded instantly. Her face went pale and she swallowed hard, realizing what she had forgotten, or maybe underestimated, about this court. Everything was on record. Judge Judy placed the paper down carefully, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Miss Karen," she said, her voice low but powerful, "this is what we call evidence of intent. You not only damaged that vehicle, but you knowingly refused to take responsibility. You told your neighbor not to bother because she couldn't prove it. Well, guess what? She just did." Karen's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. She blinked, searching for words. It's not what it looks like," she stammered finally. "It was a misunderstanding." "I didn't mean it that way." Judy tilted her head slightly. How exactly did you mean it, Miss Karen? Because this message sounds like a person admitting guilt and mocking the victim for seeking justice. Karen tried again, her voice cracking. I was upset that day. I didn't think she'd actually take it to court. Judy raised an eyebrow. So your defense is that you were careless, both with your words and someone else's property? Not a very strong argument. The audience chuckled softly, but Judy immediately raised her hand. Quiet, she ordered, then turned back to Karen. You see, Ms. Karen, what happens outside this courtroom matters when you walk inside it. Your actions, your words, your attitude, they all follow you. Karen leaned forward desperately. I can pay for the damage, okay? Just the repair cost. That's fair, right? Judy's expression didn't soften. If you'd walked in here respectfully, owned your mistake, and apologized, I might have agreed with that. But you didn't. You lied. You insulted your neighbor, and you disrespected this court. She paused, letting the silence stretch long enough for Karen to feel it. And now you're learning that arrogance is a very expensive habit. Karen shook her head in disbelief. You're making this sound like I'm some criminal. It's just a car. Judy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. It's not about the car anymore. It's about your character. You walked into this courtroom acting like the rules didn't apply to you. You called me emotional. You mocked justice itself. And now you want sympathy? Karen's mouth opened, but Judy lifted her hand again, a silent command to stop talking. No, you've embarrassed yourself enough, she said sharply. I've given you every chance to show even an ounce of decency, and you've failed at everyone. The courtroom was absolutely still. Even the sound of breathing seemed to vanish. Karen sat frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk, her fake confidence completely shattered. Judge Judy picked up her pen and began writing something down. The sound of the pen scratching against paper filled the silence, slow, deliberate, final. Karen stared at her, her face red, tears threatening to form, but she didn't dare speak. When Judy finished, she placed the pen down carefully and looked directly at her again. I suggest you take the next few minutes to think about how costly your attitude has become, she said, because when I give my verdict, you're going to feel it. Karen looked down, shaking her head, whispering, This can't be happening. But it was. Her downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, humiliating, and completely her own doing. And in that heavy silence, everyone in the courtroom understood. The storm Judge Judy had been holding back was about to break. The courtroom felt unnaturally quiet as Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her hands folded neatly over the file. Every pair of eyes in the room was locked on her and waiting. Even Karen, who had spent most of the trial smirking, now sat perfectly still. Her confidence had drained away completely. Her breathing was heavy, her shoulders slumped, and the defiance that once filled her voice was nowhere to be found. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. She flipped through the final pages of the paperwork one last time, the sound of the papers turning echoing through the room. Then she looked up, her gaze sharp and controlled. All right, she said. I've heard enough. Karen's fingers gripped the edge of the defendant's desk. Her lips were dry and she swallowed hard, trying to predict what was coming. For the first time since she'd walked in, she wasn't rolling her eyes or making sarcastic remarks. She just stared at the judge, wide-eyed, nervous, and completely powerless. Judge Judy's voice was calm but firm. Ms. Karen, after reviewing the evidence, the photos, and the messages, I have come to a very clear conclusion. She paused, letting the suspense linger for a moment. You borrowed your neighbor's car. You damaged it. You refused to take responsibility. And then you disrespected not only her, but this entire courtroom. Karen's jaw tightened. But Judy lifted a finger. Do not interrupt me. The single command froze her mid-sentence. Judy continued, her tone even colder now. Your behavior today has been a display of arrogance, immaturity, and entitlement. You seem to believe that rules don't apply to you. You've mocked this process, insulted me personally, and tried to twist the truth to avoid accountability. She leaned forward slightly. But the thing about truth, Ms. Karen, is that it doesn't bend to your attitude. Karen tried to force a laugh, but it came out shaky. You're seriously going to make this about my attitude? Yes, Judy said bluntly, because in my courtroom, attitude matters. Respect matters. You don't walk into a court of law, call a judge hormonal, and expect to walk away without consequences. The audience murmured softly. Even they could feel what was coming. Judge Judy picked up her pen and began writing in her notes. You will pay full damages to Ms. Lila for the car, $5,400 for repairs. Karen's face softened with momentary relief. Okay, fine, whatever. I'll do that. But Judy didn't stop. She kept writing. However, she continued, her tone rising slightly, your comments, your attitude, and your text messages show a pattern of intentional disregard for others. You didn't just damage property. You mocked someone who trusted you. You lied. And you disrespected this court in a way I have rarely seen. Karen blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. Wait, what are you saying? Judy looked up, her eyes sharp as steel. I'm saying that you owe punitive damages. A message must be sent, to you and to anyone else who thinks arrogance can replace accountability. She paused, her voice dropping lower, more deliberate. The total judgment against you is $75,000. Karen's mouth fell open. 75,000? She gasped. For a few scratches? You can't be serious. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, utterly calm. I'm completely serious. It's not for a few scratches. It's for your arrogance, your lies, and your complete lack of respect in this courtroom. Let this be a lesson. Disrespect is expensive. The audience broke into murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded, silently agreeing. Lila covered her mouth, her eyes wide. She hadn't expected that outcome either. Karen's face turned red, her eyes filling with tears she was too proud to let fall. That's not fair, she whispered hoarsely. You can't do this to me. Judge Judy's voice cut through the air like a blade. Fairness left the room when you told me to calm my hormones. That sentence hit like a gavel strike before the real one even came. Judy lifted her hand and brought the gavel down once, a sharp, echoing sound that sealed Karen's fate. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $75,000. Case closed. Karen sat frozen, unable to move. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly. She tried to form words, but all that came out was a faint whisper. This can't be happening. The bailiff motioned for her to leave. Slowly, she stood up, clutching her purse tightly, as if holding on to the last piece of her pride. The audience watched silently as she made her way toward the exit, each step heavier than the last. She had walked in with laughter and arrogance, but she was walking out in silence, broken and humiliated. Lila, still seated, looked down for a moment, then glanced up at Judge Judy with quiet gratitude. Judy gave her a single nod, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Justice had been served. As Karen reached the door, she turned one last time, her lips trembling. She looked at Judge Judy, but the judge had already moved on, preparing for the next case. For Judy, it was just another day in court. But for Karen, it was a life lesson carved deep into memory, one she would never forget. When the doors closed behind her, the sound echoed like an ending, not just to the case, but to her arrogance. Pride had cost her $75,000, and perhaps something even more valuable, her dignity. And that is the kind of justice you'll never forget. In Judge Judy's courtroom, respect isn't asked for, it's earned. If you felt that justice was served today, don't scroll away. Hit that like button, subscribe to HD Stories, and join us for more powerful stories that'll leave you speechless. Because every story here reminds us what truth really looks like. Imagine walking into Judge Judy's courtroom with full confidence, believing you're right, thinking the world owes you respect, only to end up embarrassing yourself in front of millions. That's exactly what happened when a furious Karen stormed into court, convinced she had been disrespected by her neighbor. But the moment she opened her mouth, things went downhill fast, and when her husband tried to defend her, hoping to save her, what he said didn't just fail. It destroyed their case, their reputation, and left Judge Judy stunned. Stay with me because this moment will make you laugh. Shake your head. And maybe even say, they really thought that would work? The courtroom buzzed with quiet whispers as the audience settled into their seats, sensing that drama was about to unfold. Cameras rolled, papers shuffled, and the bailiff called the next case. And then, with the attitude of someone walking into a royal palace instead of a courtroom, Karen strutted to the podium. Oversized sunglasses, bright scarf wrapped dramatically around her neck, chin lifted like she owned the place. She came prepared to put on a show. Beside her stood her husband, standing stiff and proud, like a soldier guarding a queen. His chest was puffed out, jaw tight, eyes scanning the room as if daring anyone to doubt them. Across from this theatrical entrance stood Mrs. Reed. Unlike the couple drenched in ego, she looked tired, humble, and almost defeated by life's daily battles. Her clothes were plain but neat, her hair in a simple ponytail, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She wasn't here for drama. She just wanted peace and fairness. If anything, she looked like someone who had been dragged into the spotlight against her will, the complete opposite of Karen, who seemed to crave it. Judge Judy glanced up over her glasses, already unimpressed. She scanned their faces, and she didn't need psychic powers to know exactly who the troublemaker was. "All right," she said, her voice sharp like a knife slicing through tension. "Who's the plaintiff, and what are you claiming?" Before Mrs. Reed could inhale, Karen launched forward like a rocket. "Your Honor!" she cried dramatically, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "This woman harassed me. She insulted me, humiliated me, and then called me rude in front of the entire neighborhood." Karen placed a hand over her heart, shaking her head like a misunderstood hero in a dramatic movie. Her husband nodded fiercely, almost comically, like a hype man backing up a superstar performance. Mrs. Reed sighed deeply, the exhaustion clear in her voice. "Your Honor," she began softly, "all I did was ask her to move her car. She parked in front of my driveway again, and I politely told her I needed to leave for work." She screamed at me. "I didn't insult her. I didn't raise my voice. I just needed to go to my job." Karen gasped like she had been stabbed by betrayal. "That is a lie, a complete lie," she shouted. "I am a respectable woman in my community. People know me. I don't behave that way with strangers." Judge Judy raised her hand sharply, shutting Karen down like a light switch. "Ma'am, don't perform for me. This isn't Broadway, and I don't need a theater show." Soft laughter rose from the room. Karen's cheeks turned bright red, and she adjusted her scarf as if tightening it would somehow save her dignity. She muttered under her breath, annoyed that the crowd found humor in her performance rather than support. Judge Judy leaned back, pen tapping lightly, eyes piercing straight through Karen. "So," she said calmly, "she simply asked you to move your car?" Karen rolled her eyes like a spoiled teenager. "No, Your Honor, she attacked me, attacked my spirit." Her tone was aggressive, extremely aggressive. "I am a sensitive person and I don't accept disrespect." Mrs. Reed shook her head slowly, unable to believe this version of events. "All I said was, 'Could you please move your car?' That was it. And she told me to, quote, 'learn my place and stop talking to people above me.'" A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. People leaned forward, eyebrows raised, whispering in disbelief. Karen's husband looked around, trying to figure out how bad that sounded. And judging by his worried expression, he knew it wasn't good. Judge Judy's eyebrow lifted, her voice low and dangerous. "Did you say that?" Karen stuttered, her confidence suddenly cracking. I might have said something similar, but she provoked, "No!" Judge Judy cut her off so fast it felt like a verbal slap. "Adults take responsibility. They don't rewrite reality when they don't like how it looks." Karen's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. Her husband leaned in to whisper, trying to calm her, telling her to relax. But Karen crossed her arms hard across her chest, chin up, refusing to back down. She looked like a child who had been told she couldn't have candy, frustrated, angry, and incapable of understanding why she wasn't winning. Judge Judy turned to Mrs. Reed again, her face softer. "And all you wanted was to leave your driveway?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied quietly. "I work early mornings. I didn't have time for drama. I just needed to go." Karen scoffed loudly, like she couldn't believe the world was being fooled by what she saw as a fake story. "Oh, please," she snapped. "She exaggerates. She plays victim. Everyone in our neighborhood knows I am a kind person." Judge Judy stared at her for a long moment, letting silence do the talking. Then she said calmly but firmly, "I have been doing this long enough to spot kindness from arrogance. And arrogance doesn't wear sunglasses indoors." Laughter exploded again, echoing through the room. Karen froze, her face twisting with embarrassment and anger. Her husband looked like he wanted to disappear under the floor. It was clear Judge Judy wasn't buying Karen's act. And deep down, Karen knew she was losing control. This wasn't going the way she expected, and suddenly, the courtroom wasn't her stage anymore. It was her reality. And reality was catching up fast. Judge Judy shifted her attention toward Karen's husband, who had been standing tall and quiet like he was waiting for the right moment to shine. She tapped her pen lightly on the bench and raised her chin. "Sir," she said, voice sharp but calm, "do you have anything useful to add? Something based on facts, not emotions?" He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a presidential speech, and stepped forward confidently. "Yes, Your Honor," he began. "I would like to say that my wife is a classy woman. She has standards." He cast a quick, dismissive glance toward Mrs. Reed. "She is used to being treated with a certain level of respect. We do not socialize with people like her." Silence swept across the room. The audience froze. Even the air felt still. If there was a moment when everything shifted, it was this one. The arrogance in his voice hung in the air like a bad smell. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses and set them on the desk, staring directly at him. It wasn't just any stare, it was the stare. The kind that reaches straight into someone's soul and asks, "Are you sure you want to continue? People like her?" She repeated, each word cutting like ice. "You want to explain what that means?" The man's confidence wavered. He swallowed hard, but his pride refused to let him back down fully. "I simply mean," he continued, though not as confidently now, "that we live in a nice neighborhood. We worked hard to earn our lifestyle. We expect people to behave properly. Respectfully, she does not." Mrs. Reed blinked slowly, her frustration finally visible. "I have lived there longer than them," she said quietly but firmly. "I bought my home before they even moved to the city. I work 2 jobs to support myself. I mind my own business. I don't deserve to be spoken to like that." Some audience members nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads at the sheer entitlement coming from the couple. Judge Judy leaned back, crossed her arms, and looked at Karen's husband like he had just confessed to a crime of stupidity. "So you're telling me you think you're better than her?" Karen couldn't help herself. She jumped in, eyes wide, hands flailing slightly. "Well, obviously, Your Honor. Look at her. And look at us." Judge Judy slammed her palm onto the bench. The sound echoed like thunder. "Stop talking." Karen froze instantly, lips pressed tight. Judge Judy pointed at her husband. "And you. Let me tell you something. Thinking you're above someone because of where you live or what car you drive is not class, it's arrogance. And arrogance is not a sign of success. It's a sign of insecurity." The husband stood there, shoulders slumping just a bit. His confidence, once inflated like a balloon, had just popped. The judge continued, voice steady and full of judgment. "You're not above anyone. You're standing in my courtroom in front of me, and what I'm seeing are 2 entitled adults who believe the world revolves around them." Karen's face twitched with frustration. She opened her mouth to respond again, but Judge Judy lifted a finger. No interruptions. "You've done enough talking." A quiet laugh rolled through the audience. Even people who came in supporting Karen had likely changed sides by now. Judge Judy turned back to Mrs. Reed. "I believe you," she said simply. Those 3 words hit Karen like a slap. Her jaw dropped. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "You don't even know her. She lies. We are respected in our neighborhood." Judge Judy leaned forward, voice cold enough to freeze fire. "Ma'am, yelling does not make you right. It makes you loud, and loud does not impress me." Karen deflated, but only slightly. Her ego wouldn't let her fully sink. She crossed her arms again like a spoiled teenager who had been grounded. Judge Judy continued, Let me be clear. Blocking someone's driveway is rude. She asked you politely to move. Your response was to belittle her and claim you were above her. Karen's husband squeezed her arm, whispering urgently, "Stop talking. Just stop." But she shook him off. Judge Judy continued, relentless yet controlled. This courtroom is about fairness. Not ego, not status, not who wears expensive sunglasses indoors. Facts matter here, and the facts do not support you. The couple stood glued in place, their confidence drained, replaced by shock and silent anger. Their plan to walk in proud and walk out praised had collapsed like a house of cards, and everyone watching could feel it. Their downfall wasn't caused by the neighbor. It wasn't caused by the judge. It wasn't even caused by fate. It was caused by their own attitude. Judge Judy lifted her gavel slightly but didn't strike it yet. She looked at Karen and her husband one last time, letting the silence stretch long enough for embarrassment to deepen. "Let me give you some advice," she said finally. "In life, when someone shows you basic respect, the right response is not arrogance. It's gratitude." Karen blinked rapidly like she wanted to cry but refused to let tears show in public. Her husband looked away, ashamed, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Judge Judy wasn't just correcting them, she was exposing them, and everyone, including them, knew it. The courtroom felt heavier now, not with anger anymore, but with that uncomfortable silence that only truth can create. Karen and her husband stood stiff, trying their best to hold on to whatever dignity they believed they had left. But dignity wasn't something they walked in with. Only pride. And pride had taken a beating. Judge Judy let the silence sit just a moment longer, giving everyone in the courtroom time to absorb what just happened. She rested her hands on the bench, her voice steadier than ever, calm, firm, and final. "You know what the funny thing is?" she began. "All of this entire case, could have been avoided with a simple moment of kindness." Karen rolled her eyes. Again, she couldn't help it. And it earned her. Another piercing glare from Judge Judy. "You blocked a driveway," the judge continued. She asked politely. "Instead of being a decent person, you chose ego. And now, here you are, wasting the court's time, embarrassing yourselves on national television." A soft murmur of agreement drifted through the audience. Karen's husband lightly tugged her sleeve, as if silently asking her to stop reacting, because each reaction only dug them deeper. But Karen wasn't someone used to being told she was wrong. She was used to control, approval, attention, and right now, the entire room was giving her the opposite. She took a breath, trying to regain control. "Your Honor," she started, voice shaking with anger more than emotion. "I don't think you understand how rude she was." Judge Judy cut her off again, her voice sharp and final. "No, I understand perfectly." She turned to Mrs. Reed. "And you handled yourself like an adult. You did what reasonable people do. You calmly asked for something reasonable. You didn't yell. You didn't insult. You didn't try to prove anything. You simply wanted to leave your house." Mrs. Reed nodded softly, lips pressed tight to hold back the emotion that came with finally feeling heard. There was something in her eyes, not pride, but relief. The kind that comes when someone finally stands up for you after you've been treated small for too long. Judge Judy turned her attention back to the couple, and her tone grew colder. "But the two of you believe respect is something owed to you, not earned from you. That's not confidence. That's entitlement." Karen's cheeks flushed a deep red, anger mixing with humiliation. She opened her mouth again, but her husband quickly whispered harshly, "Stop, please." His voice cracked slightly, not from anger, but from exhaustion. This pride of theirs, this inflated ego they carried like a trophy, had not only failed them, it had dragged them into public humiliation. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to make this simple," she said. "Your behavior was inappropriate. Your attitude was insulting, and your argument has no legal merit. Mrs. Reed did nothing wrong. You caused the problem, and then you tried to turn yourselves into the victims. That is not how justice works." Karen looked around the room, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend her. But no one did. Even the audience members who had leaned forward earlier now leaned back, their expressions cold and unsympathetic. She was alone in her drama now. Judge Judy continued, but her voice softened. Not for the couple, but for the lesson. There are two kinds of people in this world, she said. Those who believe respect must be given to others, and those who believe respect must be given to them. The first group earns respect. The second group demands it and loses it. It was a sentence heavy enough to settle into everyone's mind. Karen swallowed, her voice suddenly quiet and defensive. We just wanted to be respected. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The strength was in her calmness. Respect is not something you scream for. Respect is not something you demand by calling yourself above others. Respect is shown, and you showed none. Karen's husband finally lowered his head, running a hand across his face, realizing maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong. But the realization came too late. Judge Judy picked up her gavel. I find in favor of the defendant. Judgment for Mrs. Reed. A wave of relief washed over Mrs. Reed. She exhaled, not happily, but gratefully. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk. She just closed her eyes for a moment, shoulders relaxing, like someone who finally put down a heavy weight they had been forced to carry. Karen, however, reacted like the world had betrayed her. This court is biased, she snapped. This is ridiculous. You always take the other side. We are the ones with a reputation. Judge Judy raised her hand calmly. Let me tell you something, ma'am. Reputation isn't built by money. It isn't built by pretending you're better than someone. Reputation is built by how you treat people when nobody is cheering for you. Karen froze, stunned by the truth in the sentence. She didn't respond. Her voice finally failed her. Her husband tugged her arm gently. Let's go, he whispered. She didn't move at first. She hated losing. But losing wasn't her real fear. Her real fear was being exposed. Exposed as someone who wasn't the hero she imagined herself to be. And right now, she stood exposed in front of everyone, and she didn't know how to handle it. Finally, she turned sharply, her scarf swinging dramatically, and marched out of the courtroom. Her husband followed quietly, no longer puffed up, no longer proud. He walked behind her with slow steps, like a man who had finally recognized the cost of pride. Mrs. Reed watched them leave, not with satisfaction, but with quiet relief. She didn't need them to suffer. She only needed fairness. And today she got it. Judge Judy closed her case file and looked at the audience one last time. We rise by lifting others, she said calmly, not by stepping on them. Then the gavel struck, a sharp, final sound that echoed through the courtroom. Case closed. Lesson delivered. Dignity restored and ego humbled. Like this story and subscribe to HD. Stories for more powerful courtroom justice moments. Hit the bell icon. You won't want to miss the next one. Imagine walking into Judge Judy's courtroom thinking you can sweet-talk your way out of trouble with cupcakes. That's exactly what Karen did. She thought a few frosted pastries could melt Judge Judy's heart and make her forget about the case. But what Judy said next didn't just leave Karen speechless. It became one of the most talked-about moments in courtroom TV history. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. It was a regular morning in Judge Judy's courtroom, bright lights, cameras rolling, and a packed audience waiting for the next dose of drama. The familiar tension filled the air, the kind that makes even innocent people nervous. But then came Karen. From the moment she strutted in, everyone could tell she wasn't like the usual defendants. Her bright pink blazer sparkled under the lights, and in her perfectly manicured hands, she carried a fancy white box tied with a shiny ribbon. She didn't look worried. She looked proud, like she was walking into a social event instead of a courtroom. Her case seemed simple. Her former neighbor, a quiet middle-aged woman named Linda, was suing her for unpaid rent and damage to their shared property. But the way Karen carried herself made it obvious. She wasn't taking any of this seriously. While Linda stood calmly at her podium, clutching a few papers, Karen tapped her nails on the box and smiled as if she already knew the outcome. When Judge Judy entered, the audience fell silent. The judge's sharp eyes scanned the room and landed on Karen, who was already beaming. Let's start with introductions, Judy said. Linda spoke first, her voice steady. explaining that she was there to get back the $200 Karen owed for rent and repairs. When it was Karen's turn, she stepped forward with a sugary smile and said, "Your Honor, before we begin, I just want to say, I brought you something." The room froze. Bird, the bailiff, raised an eyebrow. Judge Judy leaned slightly forward, curious but cautious. "You brought me something?" She repeated slowly. Karen nodded proudly and untied the ribbon, opening the box like it was a treasure chest. Inside were 6 cupcakes, frosted, sprinkled, and topped with tiny pink hearts. "I baked them myself," she said cheerfully. "Just a little thank you for taking time out of your busy day." You could almost hear the collective gasp from the audience. Judy's expression didn't move an inch. "You baked me cupcakes," she said flatly. "In my courtroom?" Karen, still oblivious to how bad this looked, nodded again. "Yes, ma'am. I thought it might lighten the mood. Everyone could use a little sweetness, right?" Judge Judy leaned back, arms crossed. "Let me make something perfectly clear," she said, her voice calm but razor sharp. "You don't bring gifts to court. You don't try to butter up the judge, not with money, not with flattery, and certainly not with baked goods." Karen's smile faltered. "Oh no, it's not like that," she stammered. "I just wanted to show that I'm not a bad person." "You thought wrong," Judy snapped. "This isn't a bake sale. This is a courtroom." A few audience members chuckled, but Karen didn't seem to get the message. She tried again, voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to show you I'm a good person." "Stop talking," Judy interrupted, her tone cutting through the air. "You want to prove you're a good person? Pay your debts. Don't try to decorate your lies with frosting." The silence that followed was thick. Karen's face turned red as the audience exchanged glances. Her cheerful act was crumbling fast. "Well," she finally blurted, "maybe if Linda hadn't exaggerated everything, we wouldn't even be here. She's just jealous because people actually like me." Linda scoffed quietly. "Like you? You broke my fence, ruined my garden, and ignored my messages for months. You owe me $1,200, Karen." Judy's gaze locked on Karen again. "Is that true?" she asked. Karen hesitated. "I mean, maybe I broke a few things, but it wasn't that serious. Her plants weren't that great anyway." That was it. Judy's face hardened. "You damaged her property, refused to pay, and then thought cupcakes would make it disappear?" She said sharply. "You're not sweet. You're manipulative." Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen stood frozen as Judy added, "And for the record, if you ever try to bring food into my courtroom again, you'll leave with more than embarrassment." Bird smirked as Karen silently closed the cupcake box, her confidence melting faster than the frosting she had so proudly presented. As the hearing went on, Judge Judy's patience wore thin. She demanded evidence, and Linda immediately presented a neatly organized folder. Inside were clear photographs showing the broken fence, the destroyed flower beds, and the dented garden gate. There were also printed text messages, dozens of them, showing Linda politely asking Karen to pay for the damages or at least respond. Judge Judy scanned each document carefully, nodding slightly. Then she turned her sharp gaze toward Karen. "Do you have any proof to dispute this?" she asked. Karen froze for a second before letting out a nervous laugh. "Well, those pictures could be from anywhere," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "And those texts, who even knows if I sent those? Maybe someone used my phone or something." Judge Judy's eyebrows shot up. "So now you're telling me that someone impersonated you, broke into her garden, destroyed her property, and used your phone to ignore her messages? That's your defense?" Karen blinked, struggling to form words. "I mean, it's possible, right?" she mumbled. The entire courtroom erupted in laughter. Even Bird, the usually stoic bailiff, cracked a grin. Judy slammed her pen down, her voice cutting through the noise. "Possible? What's possible is that you think everyone here is as foolish as you are. But let me remind you, this courtroom runs on facts, not frosting." Karen's face turned bright red. "You don't have to be so mean, Your Honor. I was just trying to make things nice." Judy looked genuinely stunned for a second before replying, "Nice? You call ignoring your debts and lying in court nice? You came in here with cupcakes thinking that would erase your responsibility. There's nothing nice about that. It's manipulative and childish." Linda stood silently, watching the judge take control. After a tense moment, Judge Judy lifted the papers again and said firmly, "You owe her $200. And considering your attitude, your attempts to mislead the court, and your little gift, I'm adding $200 for her trouble." Karen's jaw dropped. "That's not fair!" she cried out. Judy leaned forward slightly, her tone icy but controlled. "Fair? You tried to bribe a judge with cupcakes, you wasted everyone's time, and you think you deserve fairness? You're lucky I'm still giving you a chance to walk out with dignity." The crowd chuckled. Even Linda couldn't hold back a small smile. Karen muttered under her breath, "This show is ridiculous." Judy immediately fired back, "You're absolutely right. It is ridiculous because you made it that way." "Case dismissed." She slammed the gavel down, and the sound echoed through the room like thunder. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her confidence completely shattered. Slowly, she picked up her cupcake box and walked out, her head down and face flushed. As she reached the door, Bird called out playfully, "Hey, Karen, next time, try cash instead of cupcakes." The courtroom burst into laughter again. Within hours, the episode spread across social media. Clips of Judge Judy's sharp comebacks flooded the internet, with millions of viewers calling it one of her funniest and most savage moments. Comments poured in, "You can't sweet-talk Judge Judy," and "Justice served," with frosting on the side, became viral catchphrases. Linda later told reporters, "I didn't even care about the money anymore." Watching Judge Judy handle her was worth every second. As for Karen, she vanished from social media for a while, embarrassed by how quickly her sweet plan turned sour. But her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that no charm, no gift, and no cupcake could ever fool Judge Judy. The judge's final words from that day summed it up perfectly. Respect isn't baked, it's earned. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to HD Stories for more jaw-dropping courtroom moments like this. Because here, every story reminds us, justice always finds a way.
The courtroom was tense as Karen stormed in, her face red with anger. She didn't just argue, she tried to drag Judge Judy right in front of everyone. Gasps filled the room and everyone froze, unsure what would happen next. But within 30 seconds, the tables turned completely. Karen, who thought she could intimidate the judge, ended up in handcuffs, leaving everyone shocked and speechless. What she didn't realize was that Judge Judy had seen it all before and had a plan ready. This is the story of how arrogance met justice and lost. Karen had always been known as a loud and aggressive person in her neighborhood. People whispered about her temper and her tendency to dominate any conversation. She never hesitated to argue with anyone who disagreed with her, and she loved the attention that her confrontations brought. Especially when they happened in public, she thrived on the reactions of others. Enjoying the mix of fear and annoyance in their eyes, it made her feel powerful and untouchable. And she carried that attitude with her everywhere she went, believing that nobody could challenge her and get away with it, even though most people tried to avoid her. Giving her space and keeping their distance, Karen interpreted this avoidance as respect, proof that she had the upper hand in any situation she faced. Her confidence often turned into arrogance, and it made her think that the rules did not apply to her. She often tested boundaries, knowing that most people were too intimidated to push back. And she liked it that way. The feeling of control was intoxicating, and she never wanted to let it go. When she received a notice to appear in Judge Judy's courtroom over a minor dispute with a business, she saw it as the perfect opportunity to display her fearlessness. She felt a rush of excitement mixed with anger. The idea that someone dared to question her actions made her blood boil. She started planning how she would enter the courtroom and make her presence known. She imagined the expressions on the faces of those present when they realized they were dealing with her. She rehearsed her lines in her head, thinking of the insults she could throw, the accusations she could make, all designed to show that she was strong and untouchable. Karen was determined to make this a performance. She wanted the courtroom to remember her, to fear her, and to admire her at the same time. The more she thought about it, the more her confidence grew. She felt unstoppable. She walked into the courthouse that day with a purpose, her steps quick and deliberate, her eyes scanning the room, looking at everyone as if they were beneath her. She carried herself like a storm was coming, And in a way, she felt like it was. She could feel the tension in the air as people noticed her entrance. Whispers followed her as she moved toward the courtroom. Some people tried to hide their surprise. Others watched with curiosity, but no one dared to challenge her. She thrived on that energy, the mixture of attention and fear feeding her ego. As she entered the courtroom, she paused for a moment, glancing around, her eyes locking on Judge Judy. She studied the judge carefully, noting the calmness in her posture, the sharpness in her gaze, and the confidence that radiated from her. Instead of being intimidated, Karen felt the urge to assert herself even more. She wanted to test the limits of the judge's patience. She wanted to see if the famous judge could handle someone like her. As the court session began, Karen wasted no time. She interrupted immediately, her voice loud and commanding, talking over everyone, making her presence impossible to ignore. She claimed she had been wronged, accusing the business and anyone involved of lies and deceit. She used dramatic gestures to emphasize her points, leaning forward, pointing fingers, and making sure that all eyes were on her. Judge Judy, known for her patience but strict demeanor, remained calm. She did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She let Karen speak, listening carefully to every word, her eyes focused and unblinking, showing a depth of understanding and authority that Karen had clearly underestimated. Karen, on the other hand, misread the silence. She thought that the calm and composed judge was intimidated. She interpreted the quiet as fear. She believed that the judge was unsure how to respond to her, and that thought made her bolder. She grew louder with each passing moment, her accusations more dramatic, her gestures bigger, and her words sharper. She was convinced that she had the upper hand, that the courtroom was under her control. Little did she know, her boldness was only making the judge more aware of her behavior. Judge Judy was observing every move, every word, every expression. She was forming a plan in her mind, deciding exactly how to handle this storm that had walked into her courtroom. Karen was confident, aggressive, and loud, but she was about to learn that calm intelligence and authority always outweigh arrogance and theatrics in a courtroom. Karen's frustration escalated as Judge Judy began asking questions about her story. She was clearly unprepared for the calm, precise way the judge dissected her claims. Instead of stumbling, the judge spoke slowly, deliberately, making Karen feel exposed under the scrutiny of everyone in the courtroom. Her confidence began to waver, but she refused to show it. She straightened her posture and leaned forwards, trying to assert herself even more. She waved her hands dramatically and raised her voice, insisting that her version of events was the truth. She pointed fingers at the opposing party, at the witnesses, and even at the court staff, as if sheer volume and aggression could convince the judge of her innocence. When Judge Judy asked her for proof, Karen snapped. She leaned dangerously close, almost trying to grab the judge's attention physically, as if dragging her into the argument would somehow make her right. The courtroom gasped in shock. Murmurs filled the air. Witnesses froze, unsure how to react, and court officers immediately stood up, ready to intervene if things escalated further. Karen's anger blinded her. She refused to see the calm authority of the judge. She continued shouting, her words overlapping, her accusations growing louder and more frantic. She demanded that the court accept her story without evidence, insisting that everyone believe her simply because she was speaking. She pointed at the other side, accusing them of lying. She waved her arms, leaned over the desk, and tried to use every gesture possible to intimidate. She thought that aggression would overwhelm the courtroom, but the more she tried to act intimidating, the more obvious it became how out of control she was. Judge Judy's calmness and composure created a stark contrast to Karen's chaos. Every gesture, every shout, and every angry word only highlighted her lack of control. The judge did not flinch, she did not raise her voice, and she did not show any sign of fear. Instead, she quietly observed, analyzing every move, noting every lie, exaggeration, and attempt to manipulate the situation. Karen, however, could not see this. She was too consumed by her own anger. She could only think about winning, about dominating, about making everyone fear her. She ignored the silent power of the judge, believing that loudness and aggression would always work in her favor. As Karen continued, her voice cracking from shouting, her face red with frustration, Judge Judy took a deep breath, maintaining eye contact. Letting Karen exhaust herself, she knew that Karen's actions were about to backfire. The more Karen tried to dominate, the clearer it became that she was out of control. Court officers remained on alert, standing close but allowing the judge to handle the situation. Witnesses whispered nervously, some feeling scared, others feeling amazed at the judge's patience. Karen's gestures became more exaggerated. She waved her hands wildly, leaned too far over the desk, and stomped her feet, trying to force a reaction. She accused everyone in the courtroom of conspiring against her, but her words were increasingly incoherent, her anger clouding her judgment. She could not see that her aggression was making her look weaker, not stronger. Judge Judy, in contrast, did not interrupt. She did not scold. She only watched, her mind carefully planning the next step. She understood exactly how to turn Karen's aggression into her own downfall. She allowed Karen to continue, knowing that every shout, every wild gesture, and every false claim would make the courts see the truth clearly. Karen's frustration grew with every second that passed. Her attempts to intimidate were failing, yet she refused to stop. She thought that persistence would eventually win the room, that eventually the judge would relent. But Judge Judy's experience told her otherwise. She knew that Karen was exposing herself, and that patience and strategy were stronger than any angry outburst. Karen's focus on attacking distracted her from seeing the consequences. She did not notice the court officers edging closer, ready to act if necessary. She did not notice the growing tension among the witnesses. She did not realize that her plan to dominate the courtroom was crumbling. And with every second, the moment when her actions would finally backfire was coming closer. Judge Judy's calm authority filled the room without a word, and Karen's attempts at aggression were only emphasizing her lack of control. The scene was tense, charged, and on the edge of chaos, yet the judge remained composed, quietly assessing the situation, knowing exactly when to act, knowing that Karen's own anger and impulsiveness would soon undo her. In a few seconds, Judge Judy acted decisively, her eyes locking on Karen as she recognized that the situation had escalated beyond words. Karen's behavior had clearly crossed the line from verbal aggression into physical intimidation. Leaning too far over the desk, gesturing wildly and attempting to grab attention in a way that was unacceptable in a courtroom, the judge raised her hands slightly, a small gesture that carried absolute authority, signaling the court officers to step in. Karen, caught up in her own rage, did not immediately notice the subtle command. She continued shouting, insisting that she had every right to act this way. Claiming that she was being unfairly targeted and that nobody could stop her, she leaned forward again, waving her hands and pointing at everyone in the rooms, trying to assert dominance. But the court officers, trained for such situations, moved quickly and firmly, approaching her with controlled precision. Their presence alone was enough to momentarily startle Karen. She blinked, her eyes widening, as she realized that her theatrics were no longer tolerated. She tried to resist, pushing back against the officers, yelling at them, claiming that they had no right to interfere. But the officers remained calm, steady, and unyielding. They gently but firmly guided her away from the desk, creating a barrier between her and Judge Judy. The courtroom fell silent, every person present holding their breath. Only Karen's loud protests and shouts breaking the quiet. The witnesses and spectators stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how quickly the situation had turned. Moments ago, Karen had believed she was in control. She had believed that her aggression would intimidate the judge and everyone else in the room, but now the very behavior she thought would empower her had become her downfall. Judge Judy's calm authority filled the room, her presence alone asserting the law and order. The contrast between the judge's composed demeanor and Karen's frantic resistance was stark. Every movement of the officers, every word spoken by Karen, emphasized how completely the power dynamic had shifted. Karen's anger, which had been her weapon, had become her weakness, her frustration mounting as she realized that she could no longer manipulate the situation. She struggled, flailed her arms, tried to speak over the officers, but the controlled and measured actions of the court staff left no room for further disruption. The judge watched intently, ensuring that no one was harmed and that the law was maintained. Karen's outburst, which had started as a display of dominance, now made her appear desperate, unbalanced, and vulnerable. The courtroom audience, previously tense and anxious, now watched with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and a growing sense of justice being served. Whispers rippled through the room as people commented on how quickly Karen's arrogance had been dismantled. The moment was a lesson in the consequences of uncontrolled aggression, and everyone present could see the transformation from chaos to order. Karen's own energy, which she had used to intimidate, was now being used against her. Each shout, each attempt to resist, only solidified her position as the one being restrained. Judge Judy's experience and strategic patience had ensured that the situation never spiraled further. She had allowed Karen to expose herself fully, to exhaust her own rage, and to reveal her lack of control. The officers maintained their firm yet respectful hold, guiding Karen to a position where she could be secured safely. The shouts continued briefly but gradually lost intensity. As Karen began to realize the futility of her actions, the room remained tense, the silence punctuated only by her frustrated cries. Every person present witnessed the undeniable shift of power. Karen, who had believed she could manipulate and dominate the courtroom, now faced the undeniable reality that authority and law could not be challenged through aggression. Her face showed a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and stunned recognition. She had underestimated Judge Judy, underestimated the court officers, and underestimated the rules of the courtroom. The courtroom, once on the edge of chaos, was now under full control. The lesson was clear to everyone watching. No amount of shouting, no amount of aggression could ever overcome the calm, precise, and unwavering authority of the law. Karen's anger and aggression had turned completely against her, and in that room, in that exact moment, the audience understood that her downfall was not sudden, but the result of her own uncontrolled behavior, witnessed in real time as Judge Judy and the court officers maintained order with quiet strength, skill, and authority, proving that justice is always stronger than intimidation, and that control, patience, and strategy will always prevail over reckless aggression. As the officers placed handcuffs on Karen, she finally realized that her attempt to humiliate Judge Judy had completely failed. The defiance she had carried into the courtroom was gone, replaced by a mix of frustration, disbelief, and shock. She struggled slightly, but the firm grip of the officers reminded her that resistance was useless. The audience watched in silence, unable to hide their astonishment at the rapid turn of events. Moments ago, Karen had believed she controlled the entire room, that her anger and loud accusations would intimidate everyone, including the judge. But now she saw how completely wrong she had been. Her face flushed, her eyes wide. She tried to speak, to argue, but no one paid attention. The courtroom was focused on Judge Judy, who stood calmly observing the final stage of Karen's humiliation. Whispers rippled through the crowd as witnesses commented on the astonishing reversal, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in silent agreement with the judge's authority. Karen, still in handcuffs, tried again to raise her voice, insisting that she had been wronged, that the officers had no right to restrain her, that she was the victim in this situation. But every word she uttered only reinforced her defeat. Judge Judy addressed the court calmly, her voice firm but composed, explaining that respect for the courtroom and the law is not optional, that anyone who crosses these boundaries, no matter how confident or aggressive, must face the consequences. She emphasized that the courtroom is a place of order, fairness, and justice, and that no one, not even the loudest, most arrogant person, can disrupt that order with threats, shouting, or intimidation. Karen's humiliation deepened with every word. She had thought that her anger and aggression were her weapons, but she realized too late that they had become her weaknesses. Her plan to dominate the courtroom had completely backfired. She had underestimated the judge's experience, patience, and authority, and now she was paying the price. The spectators in the courtroom could hardly believe the transformation. The woman who had entered the room with confidence and arrogance was now restrained, subdued, and utterly defeated. The contrast was striking, and it sent a clear message to everyone present about the consequences of reckless behavior, as Karen struggled quietly in her handcuffs. Judge Judy continued, highlighting the importance of accountability, explaining that no one is above the law, that every action has a consequence, and that aggression and intimidation have no place in a civilized courtroom. Her words were measured but powerful, each sentence reinforcing the lesson Karen had learned the hard way. The officers remained vigilant, ensuring that the situation remained under control, while the audience absorbed every detail, understanding the gravity of the events unfolding before them. Karen's eyes darted around the room, realizing that her reputation had taken a serious blow. The neighbors, witnesses, and even the court staff who had previously been intimidated by her now saw her true state. Her arrogance and attempts to dominate had collapsed in the face of calm authority. Judge Judy's measured response left no room for doubt. Her authority was unquestionable, her patience unmatched, and her control absolute. Karen had entered the courtroom thinking she could humiliate the judge, but instead she had become the example of what happens when someone disregards the rules and challenges the law. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with relief, tension, and awe, as everyone recognized the lesson that had just been taught. Karen's failed attempt to assert dominance became a story of authority, patience, and justice prevailing over aggression. The judge's actions showed that power lies not in anger or shouting, but in calm, calculated responses and unwavering adherence to the law. When the officers finally escorted Karen from the courtroom, her head bowed, her attempts at defiance silenced, the spectators felt a sense of closure, a sense that justice had been served completely and decisively. The lesson was unforgettable, leaving an impression that no amount of arrogance or aggression could ever overpower law and order. As people slowly left the courtroom, their whispers confirming the impact of what they had witnessed, everyone understood the same clear message: respect is mandatory. Boundaries exist for a reason, and anyone who tries to defy them will face the consequences. Karen's humiliation was complete, and the story of her defeat would remain a cautionary tale for anyone who believed they could challenge the authority of a courtroom and the wisdom of Judge Judy. Her plan to dominate the room had turned into a lesson that no one present would ever forget. After the incident, the story of Karen's failed attempt to challenge Judge Judy spread quickly. It became the talk of the town, whispered in offices, discussed in cafes, and shared on social media. People were amazed at how quickly her arrogance had turned against her, how someone who had thought she could intimidate a courtroom ended up restrained and humiliated. The details of the event were retold with astonishment, focusing on Karen's wild gestures, her shouts, and the swift intervention by the officers. While Judge Judy's calm and precise handling of the situation was praised endlessly, the contrast between Karen's chaos and the judge's authority became the main point of discussion. Everyone who heard the story could see clearly that arrogance and aggression are never stronger than patience, experience, and control. People marveled at the way the judge had allowed Karen to expose herself completely before acting. It was a masterclass in maintaining authority without raising one's voice. Karen herself became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances commented on her behavior, shaking their heads at her recklessness. Some felt sympathy, but most recognized that she had brought the consequences upon herself. The incident quickly became a lesson not just for Karen, but for anyone who believed that loudness, aggression, and intimidation could win a battle. It showed that the courtroom is a place of rules, boundaries, and respect, and that crossing those boundaries comes at a cost. Judge Judy's reputation for handling even the most difficult and aggressive people grew stronger. People who had doubts about her patience and judgment were reminded that she could handle chaos with calmness and authority. The courtroom atmosphere returned to its usual order, more focused, more respectful, and more aware of the power of the law. The staff, the witnesses, and the regular visitors saw firsthand how quickly a situation could turn and how important it was to maintain composure. Karen, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her actions. She had to deal with public embarrassment, a formal reprimand, and the realization that her behavior had been unacceptable. She was forced to confront the reality that her anger and aggression had only made things worse, that her attempts to control others through intimidation had failed completely, and that in a courtroom, respect is never optional. Over the following days, Karen reflected on what had happened. She remembered the shock in the room when the officers moved in, the silence that followed her failed outburst, and the way Judge Judy had calmly yet firmly restored order. She could not deny that she had underestimated the judge, underestimated the rules, and underestimated the consequences of her own behavior. The humiliation she felt was compounded by knowing that many people were talking about her actions. Her reputation suffered, and she realized that true influence and respect cannot be forced. They must be earned. The lesson was clear and undeniable. Control, patience, and knowledge of the law are far more powerful than anger, shouting, or aggression. The story of the courtroom incident spread beyond the immediate witnesses, reaching news outlets and social circles. People used it as an example when discussing consequences for reckless behavior. The event became a cautionary tale, demonstrating that no one is above the law, no matter how confident or aggressive they might seem. For Judge Judy, the incident reinforced her own philosophy, showing that experience, patience, and careful observation always prevail. She had maintained authority without escalation, proved that justice is always stronger than intimidation, and set a clear precedent that disrespect has real consequences. The courtroom staff, having witnessed the episode firsthand, felt a renewed sense of respect for the law and the system. They understood that handling difficult people requires calmness, strategy, and authority, and that even the most chaotic situations can be resolved effectively when the right approach is applied. Karen, slowly coming to terms with the outcome, realized that public outbursts and disrespect have real repercussions. She could no longer rely on aggression to get what she wanted. She had to confront the fact that her behavior had not only embarrassed her, but also damaged her credibility. And she understood, perhaps for the first time, that respect for rules, procedures, and authority is essential in every part of life. The incident left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The spectators, the witnesses, the staff, and even the people hearing the story afterward understood the powerful lesson that arrogance without control leads to downfall, and that calmness, knowledge, and authority always win in the end. Karen's attempt to humiliate Judge Judy had ended in her own embarrassment. Leaving a clear and memorable story of justice served, it became an example of how quickly a situation can turn, how consequences follow actions, and how true power lies in control, patience, and respect for the law. How someone who had thought she could intimidate a courtroom ended up restrained and humiliated. The details of the event were retold with astonishment, focusing on Karen's wild gestures, her shouts, and the swift intervention by the officers. While Judge Judy's calm and precise handling of the situation was praised endlessly, the contrast between Karen's chaos and the judge's authority became the main point of discussion. Everyone who heard the story could see clearly that arrogance and aggression are never stronger than patience, experience, and control. People marveled at the way the judge had allowed Karen to expose herself completely before acting. It was a masterclass in maintaining authority without raising one's voice. Karen herself became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances commented on her behavior, shaking their heads at her recklessness. Some felt sympathy, but most recognized that she had brought the consequences upon herself. The incident quickly became a lesson not just for Karen, but for anyone who believed that loudness, aggression, and intimidation could win a battle. It showed that the courtroom is a place of rules, boundaries, and respect, and that crossing those boundaries comes at a cost. Judge Judy's reputation for handling even the most difficult and aggressive people grew stronger. People who had doubts about her patience and judgment were reminded that she could handle chaos with calmness and authority. The courtroom atmosphere returned to its usual order, more focused, more respectful, and more aware of the power of the law. The staff, the witnesses, and the regular visitors saw firsthand how quickly a situation could turn and how important it was to maintain composure. Karen, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her actions. She had to deal with public embarrassment, a formal reprimand, and the realization that her behavior had been unacceptable. She was forced to confront the reality that her anger and aggression had only made things worse, that her attempts to control others through intimidation had failed completely, and that in a courtroom, respect is never optional. Over the following days, Karen reflected on what had happened. She remembered the shock in the room when the officers moved in, the silence that followed her failed outburst, and the way Judge Judy had calmly yet firmly restored order. She could not deny that she had underestimated the judge, underestimated the rules, and underestimated the consequences of her own behavior. The humiliation she felt was compounded by knowing that many people were talking about her actions. Her reputation suffered, and she realized that true influence and respect cannot be forced. They must be earned. The lesson was clear and undeniable. Control, patience, and knowledge of the law are far more powerful than anger, shouting, or aggression. The story of the courtroom incident spread beyond the immediate witnesses, reaching news outlets and social circles. People used it as an example when discussing consequences for reckless behavior. The event became a cautionary tale, demonstrating that no one is above the law, no matter how confident or aggressive they might seem. For Judge Judy, the incident reinforced her own philosophy, showing that experience, patience, and careful observation always prevail. She had maintained authority without escalation, proved that justice is always stronger than intimidation, and set a clear precedent that disrespect has real consequences. The courtroom staff, having witnessed the episode firsthand, felt a renewed sense of respect for the law and the system. They understood that handling difficult people requires calmness, strategy, and authority, and that even the most chaotic situations can be resolved effectively when the right approach is applied. Karen, slowly coming to terms with the outcome, realized that public outbursts and disrespect have real repercussions. She could no longer rely on aggression to get what she wanted. She had to confront the fact that her behavior had not only embarrassed her, but also damaged her credibility. And she understood, perhaps for the first time, that respect for rules, procedures, and authority is essential in every part of life. The incident left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The spectators, the witnesses, the staff, and even the people hearing the story afterward understood the powerful lesson that arrogance without control leads to downfall, and that calmness, knowledge, and authority always win in the end. Karen's attempt to humiliate Judge Judy had ended in her own embarrassment. Leaving a clear and memorable story of justice served, it became an example of how quickly a situation can turn, how consequences follow actions, and how true power lies in control, patience, and respect for the law. The courtroom returned to normal, the lesson ingrained in everyone's mind, and Karen left with a permanent reminder that arrogance and aggression cannot overcome wisdom and authority. The story of her defeat would be remembered for years, serving as a warning to anyone who believed they could challenge the law and get away with it. And for Judge Judy, it was yet another confirmation that justice, calmness, and strategy will always prevail over chaos, aggression, and arrogance. If you enjoyed this unbelievable courtroom moment, make sure to like and subscribe to HD Stories for more shocking and inspiring stories. Stay with us because the next story will leave you speechless and amazed.
Some people believe respect is optional until life teaches them otherwise. When a loud, entitled woman walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, no one expected what came next. She rolled her eyes, talked over the judge, and insulted everyone around her. But the moment she looked Judge Judy in the eye and snapped, "Mind your menopause, lady," the room froze. Judge Judy didn't yell. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she delivered a calm, devastating lesson that turned the courtroom into pure shock and cost the woman $50,000. Stay with me. This one will satisfy your soul. She entered the courtroom like she owned it, chin lifted high, sunglasses pushed dramatically on top of her head, and a smirk carved across her face as if the world revolved around her attitude. There was no nervousness, no humility, not even curiosity. She didn't come seeking justice. She came to dominate, to argue, to prove a point that only existed in her mind. Every step she took echoed with a loud declaration. "I'm right, and I don't care what anyone else thinks." Before the judge even entered, she was already performing. She sighed loudly, not once, but again and again, making sure everyone could hear her frustration. She tapped her nails on the bench like a ticking clock, shaking her leg impatiently, complaining loudly that she didn't have all day for this nonsense, and that she had better things to do than sit around with people who don't know how life works. A few people in the audience exchanged awkward glances, leaning away slightly as if they didn't want to be mistaken for knowing her. The plaintiff stood quietly on the opposite side, hands folded politely, eyes lowered, hoping the moment wouldn't escalate before the judge even spoke. It was clear she wasn't there for drama. She was there for justice, for fairness, for closure. Then Judge Judy walked in, calm, composed, alert. The room shifted, the atmosphere tightened, the kind of stillness that demands respect. Most people straighten up or take a deep breath when she appears. Not this woman. Instead, she looked annoyed, rolling her eyes like the judge was another inconvenience in her day. Judge Judy observed silently, that famous razor-sharp stare, studying every movement, every breath. She didn't need anyone to tell her this woman would test limits. She could sense entitlement like a storm brewing. But Judy said nothing at first. She let the room settle. She let the energy reveal itself. The plaintiff began speaking softly, explaining the situation. She was suing her former friend for $50,000. A loan that was supposed to be temporary, a promise that was supposed to be honored, a friendship built over years, broken in just months. You could hear the heaviness in her voice, the hurt behind every word. She didn't sound angry. She sounded disappointed, betrayed. Like she still couldn't believe she had to bring someone she once trusted into a courtroom to get what she was owed. The defendant scoffed loudly, tossing her hair back dramatically, as if the plaintiff's words were nothing but background noise. "Oh, please," she said. "She's only here because she's jealous of me." You could feel the audience collectively inhale. Who says that in Judge Judy's courtroom? The plaintiff blinked, stunned. Jealous? Jealous of what? Losing trust? Losing peace? Having to chase someone for months just to get back what was rightfully hers? Judge Judy raised one eyebrow. The eyebrow. The one that has shut down hundreds of liars and bullies over the years. Jealous? She asked slowly. Of what exactly? The defendant leaned forward like she was delivering a TED talk no one asked for. Of my life, my confidence, my choices, she replied, dripping with arrogance, and the room went silent. Even the air felt embarrassed for her. There was no applause, no support, just the uncomfortable stillness that comes when someone believes they're impressive while proving the opposite. Judge Judy didn't react immediately. She didn't snap back or lecture her, not yet. Instead, she simply turned her head toward the plaintiff again and gestured calmly. "Continue," she said, and that simple gesture, that calm dismissal, rattled the defendant more than shouting ever could. She crossed her arms tightly, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a joke. This whole thing is a waste of my time. I don't need lectures from anyone in here." Judy's lips tightened, not in anger but in calculation. It was the quiet before the strike, the moment every long-time viewer recognizes. The judge wasn't offended. She was preparing. Preparing to dissect every lie, every attitude-filled excuse, every moment of disrespect. The plaintiff continued, voice steady but emotional, explaining how she loaned the money to help her friend start a small business. They had been close, like sisters, sharing birthdays, family dinners, plans for the future. Trust wasn't just expected, it was assumed. But when repayment time came, excuses poured out like water. Promises turned into silence. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored, and now here they were. Friendship shattered. Trust gone, dignity dissolving under arrogance. Judge Judy listened closely, her eyes never leaving the defendant, who kept shaking her head dramatically, whispering insults under her breath like a teenager caught lying to a parent. She thought she was untouchable. She thought attitude could win what honesty couldn't. But the courtroom wasn't laughing with her. They were waiting to see how long that arrogance could stand against real accountability. And Judge Judy sat there, Quiet but powerful, ready to deliver the lesson this woman had spent her whole life avoiding. Judge Judy leaned slightly forward, her tone calm but sharp, the kind that slices through excuses like a blade through paper. She began her questioning, not aggressive, not dramatic, just precise, measured, surgical. Did you borrow the money? A simple question, a yes or no. But the defendant smirked like she was in control. I mean, technically? Sure. But it was between friends, Your Honor. We didn't need paperwork. People who actually trust each other don't need to sign things. She emphasized the word trust, like she was delivering some philosophical truth, as if ignoring responsibility made her wise instead of reckless. She shrugged dramatically as though the whole courtroom should thank her for gracing them with her logic. Judge Judy paused, staring at her in silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that makes a person either reflect or crumble. Then she spoke softly. People who do trust each other don't end up in my courtroom. You could feel the shift, the first crack in the defendant's confidence. But instead of backing down, she rolled her eyes, again, like a child refusing to listen to a parent. She leaned back, crossed her arms, tapped her foot. Every movement was disrespect disguised as confidence. The judge continued, steady as ever. Was there an agreement to repay the money? Oh, please, the defendant snapped. She's exaggerating. I told her I'd get to it when I could. She's dramatic. She needs everything in writing because she's insecure. This time, gasps echoed. Attacking the plaintiff's character wasn't just rude, it was unwise. The plaintiff remained composed, but you could see hurt flicker across her eyes. She had trusted this person. She had believed in their friendship. Now her generosity was being mocked publicly, as if kindness was foolishness. Judge Judy's gaze hardened. She asked again, slower, Did you, or did you not, promise to pay her back? The defendant smirked again. Maybe. I don't remember the exact words. People say a lot of things in friendly conversations. That was the moment the audience realized. This woman wasn't just irresponsible. She believed promises were optional. Commitments were flexible. That consequences didn't apply to her. Judge Judy's tone shifted, still calm, but heavier, like a storm gathering. You borrowed money. You used it. You promised to repay it. And now, instead of taking responsibility, you are pointing fingers, avoiding answers, and belittling the person who helped you. The defendant scoffed. You should understand that, at your age. That sentence, careless, unnecessary, dripping with disrespect, froze the room. Every head turned, every breath paused. Even the air felt stunned. Judge Judy didn't move. She didn't blink. She simply stared. A stare so steady and cold it could quiet thunder. But the defendant wasn't finished digging her grave. She leaned forward with a bitter little smile and added, Loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe you should worry about your menopause mood swings instead of my finances. It was like time stopped. The courtroom didn't just fall silent. It deflated. Every ounce of respect, patience, and tolerance evaporated in an instant. Judge Judy inhaled slowly, not angry, controlled, self-commanded, powerful. Then she spoke, her voice so calm it demanded attention. You come into my courtroom. You borrow money and refuse to repay it. You interrupt, deflect, insult your friend, and now you want to demean a woman for aging. The defendant's smirk faltered. The first sign she realized she crossed a line she didn't understand. Let me make something perfectly clear, Judy continued, and the room leaned forward, held tight by her words. Age is not an insult. Experience is not an insult. Wisdom is not something you can fake with attitude and volume. The defendant opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to backtrack, but Judy lifted one finger. Just one, and the defendant stopped. And insulting someone's biology, Judy said steadily, does not make you strong, it makes you small. Silence, deep, satisfying silence, filled the room. The kind that wraps around truth and holds it in place. No shouting, no gavel slam, no theatrics. Judge Judy didn't need volume to deliver power. Her control was the power. The defendant slouched slightly, the edge of her confidence cracking. Reality, the kind she had avoided her whole life, finally began creeping in. And the audience? They weren't just watching justice. They were watching a long-overdue lesson unfold, slow, deliberate, devastating in the most dignified way. Because sometimes the loudest lesson is spoken softly, and sometimes arrogance doesn't crumble all at once. It breaks in quiet, humiliating pieces. The courtroom felt heavier now. The energy had shifted. No longer loud, no longer arrogant. The defendant, once brimming with misplaced confidence, sat slightly smaller in her seat, arms no longer crossed proudly but resting tensely in her lap. That single calm lecture from Judge Judy had done what shouting never could. It stripped away the shield of attitude she hid behind. Judge Judy leaned back, folding her hands neatly, her face composed but firm. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. "Let's return to facts," she said. "You borrowed money. You didn't repay it. Your friend is here with documentation to prove it. So tell me, where is your proof that you don't owe this money?" The defendant lifted her chin again, trying to rescue the ego that was rapidly drowning. "I don't need proof," she said, forcing confidence back into her voice. "My word is enough. I told her I'd pay her back eventually. But I had personal things going on. Life isn't always smooth. She should understand that." Judge Judy didn't blink. "Your word," she repeated slowly, "would mean something if your behavior showed you valued it." She paused, letting the words settle like stones sinking in water. "But right now, your actions suggest your word is worth nothing." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Approval, agreement, maybe even relief. People didn't come to see arrogance win. They came to see truth stand tall. The plaintiff, still calm, handed over printed messages, bank transfer proof, and voice notes where the defendant promised to repay the loan within 6 months. Judy reviewed the evidence carefully, flipping through each page with methodical precision. Every piece of paper felt like another door closing on the defendant's escape route. "Did you send these messages?" Judy asked, lifting one paper without looking up. The defendant swallowed. Yeah, but I didn't mean right away. I meant when I could." Judy placed the paper down gently. "You said, and I quote, 'I promise I'll return every dollar in 6 months.' That isn't vague. That isn't flexible. That is a promise. A promise made. A promise broken." The defendant shifted uncomfortably. "She pressured me. She rushed me. I didn't realize she'd turn on me like this." "Real friends don't drag each other to court." Judy leaned in, eyes sharp. "Real friends don't borrow large sums and then act entitled to it. Real friends communicate. Real friends honor commitments. Then," she softened her tone, but not her authority. "And most importantly, real friends don't treat each other like they are doing a favor by returning what they borrowed." The defendant had no response. The arrogance that once filled the courtroom was draining out of her body like air escaping a balloon. Her shoulders slumped slightly, a silent admission that for the first time in this room she knew she had lost control. Judge Judy turned to the plaintiff. "You helped her. You trusted her. And instead of gratitude, she has given you disrespect. That speaks more about her character than the loan ever could." The plaintiff nodded silently, grateful someone finally saw the truth she had been carrying. Then Judy spoke the words everyone was waiting for. Clean. Precise final judgment for the plaintiff, full amount, $50,000. It was a verbal hammer strike. Not loud, but final. Powerful. Absolute. The defendant's eyes widened as the reality hit her harder than her own insults ever hit anyone else. "You can't be serious," she burst out, voice cracking with panic. "That's insane! She doesn't need the money. She has savings. She's doing this to humiliate me." Judge Judy didn't even look at her when she responded. "No, she's doing this because you owe her money, and because you believed arrogance could replace responsibility." The defendant's face twisted, anger, shock, embarrassment blending into one expression. "This isn't fair," she shouted. Judy looked up finally, tone even colder. "What isn't fair is you thinking you can insult, manipulate, and belittle your way out of paying a debt. The defendant opened her mouth again, to argue, to plead, to grasp at the last pieces of control. But Judy raised a hand, stopping her in one graceful, powerful gesture. "Let me share something with you," she said, voice low but filled with authority. "Life will always test our character, and when it does, we do not rise to the level of our ego. We fall to the level of our integrity." The room froze, every word hitting like truth amplified by silence. "You didn't lose because she sued you," Judy continued. "You lost because you chose pride over honesty, arrogance over humility, and entitlement over accountability." A hush draped over the courtroom, not one of tension now, but quiet respect. Watching someone fall is dramatic. Watching them learn is profound. "And next time," Judy added, closing her folder, "bring humility with you. It costs nothing, and it's worth far more than $50,000. The defendant stared, speechless, breathing unevenly, the weight of consequences finally sitting heavy on her shoulders. She turned toward the exit slowly, each step lacking the bold stomp she arrived with. Her chest rose like she wanted to yell again, but this time, nothing came out. As she walked out, you could feel the lesson lingering on her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The courtroom didn't just witness justice, they witnessed transformation. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. The plaintiff exhaled softly, relief mixed with sadness for a friendship lost, but gratitude for justice served. Judy gave her a small nod of reassurance, the kind that says you did right. You stood up for yourself, because in that courtroom, it wasn't just money returned. Dignity was restored, respect was defended, and arrogance was humbled. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about showing someone the mirror they spent years avoiding. And that day, the mirror was Judge Judy. If justice like this inspires you, don't just watch. Be part of this community, like, share, and subscribe to HD. Stories for more powerful moments like this.